Hello and welcome back to the garden. On this episode we're going to have a little look at the palms that have been planted out and see how they've gone after winter. You'll see on one of the recent episodes I planted out this Butia eriospertha, which obviously is doing pretty well. It's only been planted for a week or so. However, there's another 5 or 6 palms in the garden. Some of them have done well, some of them not so much, so I'll take you through that now. Okay, this was the palm in question that has been replaced with a Butia. This is a Butia odorata, and it wasn't looking too happy in that planter, as you will have seen on the previous episode. It looked like the roots had got really wet, and you can see here that the fronds at the end are turning really brown, and the centre, there was a couple of leaves that kind of pulled out, but it isn't looking great. Let's see if this has spear pulled. Ah, okay. Yep. So that has just completely spear pulled, which is a shame. This is the second one that I've tried here in the garden. Again, raised it up in the planter to try and help with that drainage, but that obviously wasn't enough. I didn't put any overhead cover over this, and it's clearly suffered the consequences. So if you are in the Midlands, in the UK, think about, if you are going to plant this out, make sure you protect it properly, otherwise you'll have a dead one on your hands. I may put some hydrogen peroxide in there and just see if anything comes back, but this looks at the moment like it's going to completely defoliate, which is a shame, but I'm fortunate enough that I did pick up that Butia before I knew this was a goner, so that made the perfect specimen plant to put in there, and I'm just going to have to make sure that I do cover that properly this winter. So the next palm, the Brahea armata, this is one of my favourite palms in the garden. It does still have some green left on some of the fronds, but as you can see here, there is quite a bit of brown on the older leaves that came out at the back end of last year. I'll put a picture up of when we first planted this. I did try and buy a slightly bigger specimen to try and help ensure that it settled in relatively quickly, but that doesn't seem to have helped things. You can see there's been a bit of rot that has set in. However, it does look like there is some green in there. So I am hoping that when we do get some warm weather and some sun, this might actually push out some new growth. And this is how a Brahea armata should look. I was fortunate enough to find this one on Marketplace quite recently for a good deal. I think I paid £150 for this one, and for those of you that do see these on the internet, you'd probably agree that that is a pretty good price for one of these. You can see it is developing a decent trunk currently. So I do have a backup to potentially go into that raised planter if the worst does happen. As you've seen, there is some green popping through, so I'm hoping that that's going to survive. It's going to get through this summer, and I'm just going to make sure that I do put an overhead cover on it to try and keep it as dry as possible. I think that that's been the problem. There's been too much wet in there. We had a really wet winter, and that definitely hasn't helped things. And as you saw on the previous video with the Butia, it looked like a bit of root rot had potentially set in. And the old faithful Trachycarpus fortunei sailed through winter pretty untouched for the most part, other than a couple of the lowest fronds on there. Now, this is a palm that I'd recommend for pretty much the majority of the UK to be able to grow. It can shrug off wet, snow, frost, and just keep coming back. And I've seen that in a lot of videos, a lot of people across the UK. Unless you're planting it in pretty much waterlogged soil, it should be okay without really any protection. I didn't protect this winter and it's been absolutely fine. This one has around 1.5 foot of trunk now, and it must be around 4 foot including the leaves. This was planted half the size. It takes them a year to really get their feet in and get established before they really start to motor away. It's putting out around 3 spears at a time. You will see that some of the leaves look a little bit more lime green and slightly yellowy, but that's because of overwinter. When it's pushed that leaf out, it isn't warm enough in the soil for it to be able to take up any nutrients. So once things do start to heat up a little bit, as you can see here from the new fronds, they will come out green. Now, the only issue with Trachycarpus fortunei that you might get is, you can see here on a couple of the top leaves, if it is a really windy area, they will bend over. But still, that provides a nice bit of interest with the rest of the garden. Okay, and then on to a few new additions of palms to the garden. Here we have Trachycarpus princeps and fortunei. So, vigorous grower like the fortunei, but also it gets the white backing on the leaves. This is only a small plant, maybe 30 centimeters, 35 centimeters, and you can see that it actually has previously spear pulled. And a good sign for that is you'll see that brown marking there on one of the leaves where a bit of rot has potentially set in. But with a lot of these young palms, they will shrug it off and often push out a new spear pretty quickly. Another Trachycarpus fortunei and princeps. This one was left in a pot outside over winter, and a lot of the other leaves have browned off. However, you can see in the centre it is pushing out a new spear, so I just need to find the right place for it, and I am thinking somewhere around here, so I might end up digging up the sycamensis shortly and actually putting the princeps in there. And then imagine in a couple of years that fortunei growing up towards the top of the house with the fortunei and princeps with the white back on either side of it. That should create some really nice structure for the garden, and then I can continue to plant some of the tropical and tender varieties in and around it. Down here to the left of the Butia there is a true princeps, and this one did actually spear pull a couple of days after I got it. You can see on the left leaf there. However, it has pushed out a new spear since then. That was a few weeks ago. I did get it planted out in the ground to try and give it the best chance possible. This one is a much slower grower from what I've seen compared to the fortunei princeps. So this one might take a little bit of time to really get established in this spot and grow up and provide a bit of structure to this part of the garden. And in here, hidden underneath the Montbéliardi and the Tetrapanax steroidal giant, is the Trachycarpus wagnerianus crossed with princeps. Again, really small plant, but this should, given the fact that it's a waggy, have stiffer leaves, and because it's crossed with princeps, have that silvery white backing onto them. Again, the plan will be here that both of those plants grow up, provide a nice bit of structure for either side of the garden and either side of this Butia, and then the Butia eriospertha. This is going to make a fantastic plant for this spot in the garden. I've added much more grit to help with that drainage in this spot. I am going to cover it up in this winter, but it should have some hybrid vigour given that it's crossed between Butia eriospertha and the queen palm, which should help with some of that growth, but also it should be one of the more hardy coconut type palms that you can grow in the UK. It's already pushed out quite a few leaves, and I'm hoping now it's in the ground it will establish itself and it'll give a nice specimen statement plant for down at the bottom of the garden. And then finally we have another Trachycarpus Wagnerianus crossed with princeps, a slightly bigger specimen here just for the side of the bed, and I think that will contrast really nicely with the Brahea that's currently in a pot and the other palms that are dotted around the garden. This one's put out around 3 or 4 spears already. Given that it is a waggy cross, it should have much stiffer leaves than the fortunei. But this is a bit of a wind tunnel with where it is planted, which is why I did go for this. And you can see even with this type of specimen that a lot of the leaves are bent over. So I'm hoping that when it does develop, that those leaves will get a lot more stiff, and that will give it some wind resistance for this part of the garden. And you can imagine that when that does grow up, the bamboo sat behind it, it will help cover this walkway really nicely. So palms are a fantastic addition to a tropical or exotic style garden. They give structure, they're evergreen for the most part, but you've got to find out which ones are hardy and which ones are actually going to look good in your garden. Some of them, they're going to require a lot of protection. They might get set back quite a lot through the winter, and ultimately it might take them the rest of summer to almost start and recover. And there are a couple of things here that I'm going to try again. So the Brahea is one of them because I think it's an absolutely fantastic palm. The Butia odorata, that isn't something at the moment that I'm going to try again in the Midlands. If I do, I'm going to have to go overboard and try and protect it as much as I possibly can. The Trachycarpus, on the other hand, they seem to be much more hardy in the Midlands, not really require much protection. The fortunei, obviously, which a lot of people know about anyway. So thanks for joining me on a video looking at the realities of growing a palm tree in the UK. There's mixed results, but some of them are definitely worth growing. If you like the video and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.